Well, good evening, everybody. Hi.
Hello.
Let's try that again. How much wine have you had? Good evening, everyone. Are you excited to be here? Okay, it's going to be interactive. I am actually going to start before I get to my friends here with a little quiz. The prize are a Drexel Dragon pen. Ooh. Okay, let's start with the first question. What year was Drexel formed?
It's on 1891.
That dude knows it. Okay. Oops.
Watch out, he's
All
a
right.
watch out, he's a ringer.
Here we go.
You don't answer
All
the
right.
second question.
There you go. Okay, so this is a little more obscure, but I think some of you will know it. Who was A.J. Drexel's business partner?
Oh, shut up.
It's right there. All right, same row. You knew it too? Okay.
That's good.
Okay, I'm going to go to this guy.
You actually have this
I'll send you one. It was J.P. Morgan, right? I think you maybe heard of that guy. So, okay, so we have an awesome set of...
Wait. So, more obscure. Why is the dragon the mascot or the emblem of Drexel? Try that one out. Yeah.
That's good.
No guesses? I think it's because A.J. Drexel was known as the Dragon of Wall Street.
Oh.
Okay.
That's
I don't
good.
have a pin, sorry.
I didn't know that
You answered
either.
your own question.
Exactly. So,
I knew nobody would know.
I'm not going to read bios. I'm just going to ask these folks to introduce themselves. They're both absolutely incredible minds. We're going to have about 20 minutes of conversation with them, and then we'll do questions with you all. I'm going to talk to them for about 20 minutes. So I'll just ask Larisa to go first to introduce yourself.
Hi. Well, I'm really pleased to be here. We know each other because we were graduate students in urban planning at MIT
Yeah,
20 years ago.
it's our reunion weekend.
It is our reunion weekend. Since then, I've worked in the public sector. I've served as city planning commissioner here in New York for over 7 years. I've run a practice focused on downtown planning. So actually, this is my favorite topic. I'm so excited to be here. And I travel and I work on downtown strategies, and I've been doing that for over 20 years. I started as a Main Street manager in Middletown, Connecticut, when I was in college, actually. So this is a passion of mine, improving places and improving cities and historic preservation absolutely is a passion of mine. And today I am the managing director of the nonprofit, public nonprofit solutions at Streetsense, which is a design consultancy based in DC, but I'm based here in New York. So that's me.
Welcome, Larisa.
Check your thing, Lisa. Make sure it's on.
I think so. You guys
can
can
hear it.
Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So, good evening, everybody. I'm Alan Greenberger. I'm the Drexel's Vice President for Real Estate and Facilities. So I oversee the whole physical plant operation, including the relationship with our development partners, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. I'm an architect by training. I practiced in Philadelphia for 34 years.
Yes.
Hi, Ollie. And I left my practice in 2008 to join the administration of newly elected Mayor Michael Nutter as the chief planner for the city of Philadelphia, that fairly quickly morphed into deputy mayor for planning and economic development. And just as the economy was going into the toilet, the mayor asked me to also run the commerce department and fix the city, or fix the employment base in the city. And we had a great run. I was with the mayor until the end of his second term, which was his term limited. And we left the city in incredibly good shape. Economic boom. Public safety was an all-time good. Homicide rates were way down. And when I left, President John Fry visited my office a few months before the administration was over, and said, what are you doing? And I said, well, I don't know. And I'm thinking I'd like to come back to an academic institution as a kind of career ender. And he said, well, just come back to Drexel and, hang out for a year and figure out what you want to do. And what I didn't know was that what that meant was that the dean, Jason's predecessor, really wanted me to be the head of the architecture, design, and urbanism department. So I did that for 5 years, and then the head of real estate and facilities left unexpectedly, and John Fry called me again and said, hey, look, Donald, his name was Donald Moore. Donald was working on a very big private partnership project. You're the only one here who knows how to do this stuff. Could you deal with it? So it's like, sure, I guess. Those of you who know John, doing things for John is like putting on a Velcro suit. Things start sticking to you. And so then there was a second one involving the College of Medicine. And finally, I just said, look, John, why don't I just do this job? And he said, that'd be great. He loved that idea. But we're going to have a search committee. You're going to have to do the whole thing, get interviewed 17 times. And here I am 2.5 years later in arguably my fourth career and hopefully my last career.
That's great. Can I snag a mic?
Yeah.
Well, I'm really glad that you brought up 2008 and kind of what a tough moment that was economically in the country. And I feel like pandemics changed the world. We know that. We're just coming out of the pandemic. We're just realizing some of the things that are changed, like the 5-day work week. That's over. That's so crazy to say. The 5-day, like in person in the office work week is truly over. So I want to start with you, Larisa, just with a really general question. I mean, what's going on in American downtowns right now? What are some of the big changes you're seeing, some of the big issues and struggles? And we'll go into all of them in detail, but just at a high level, because you're working with so many communities, what are you really seeing as patterns and trends across the country right now? And I want you to jump in after that.
Well, I always say that the thing that makes cities tick is access. Why is New York here where it is? Because there was a harbor, because you could get there. Why did Chicago thrive? Because we built the railroads. So we're living in, let me see if I can get this right, a moment of technological innovation, which is actually a transportation revolution. Because technology is making it possible for us to be in a place where we're not, right? Easily, right? And many people, and this is not everybody, but for a certain subsect of worker, we go to I go to the desk in my office and I'm at work. I don't have to travel. And that fundamentally has shifted the reason why I need to go downtown. And we see the repercussions of this unfolding in our downtowns across the country. My specialty and interest is sort of what happens at the ground plane. And so the implications that we've seen, with the loss of office workers, and even if they're only coming in 4 days a week, or three or four is sort of where we're ending up. The loss of that spending has implications for how much we can support, how much retail we can support at the ground floor. So in many cities, not every city, this is city by city, we are seeing a decline in demand that's creating vacancy. So we not only have vacancy above in the offices, we have vacancy below. And that's the existential challenge that we face. And we won't even get into the impacts on transportation and, our ability to support our transportation systems, which is like the circulatory system of our cities, but that's what keeps me up at night. What are we going to do with all of these assets and how are we going to repurpose them for new uses?
It's very clear that it's a slow climb back, but I'm very aware of a report that was prepared and published really just almost today by the Philadelphia Center City District, which is a business improvement district, a pretty robust one. They did a research survey of 26 major downtowns to understand who was coming back, what was the population downtown relative to the pre-pandemic levels. And there's good news. Actually, there's more good news than you would imagine. Did anybody remember, and I didn't remember this either, something that was heavily publicized by the media called the doom loop, which was this story about like the picture in your head of a picture of an empty office floor in some downtown, right? Blank desks, computer screens dark. And apparently every major paper in the country wrote about the doom loop, and they had the same kind of picture from their city. And so it put it in people's head that this is an utter disaster. And everybody has read probably about San Francisco being a nightmare of emptiness. Well, it turns out it's not actually so empty as you would think from what the reporting was. And what this research paper discovered was that American downtowns are actually, in some cases, doing fairly well with repopulation. Some are doing less well. Almost nobody is doing really badly. And it comes in, I'm sorry to get a little weedy here, but it comes in three components. Non-resident commuters, right? People who are coming into the city to go to work. Visitors, convention, business visitors, tourist visitors, and residents. And the mix in each city is somewhat different, and the difference does skew the life on the street. Exactly what Larisa was talking about is life on the street, like what's restaurants and stores and other activity. And some cities that are very heavily dependent on visitation, like Nashville, are doing pretty well.
Yeah.
Their numbers are above the pre-pandemic level. Cities like San Francisco, heavily invested in the tech sector, which is a kind of very remote work, was always somewhat of a remote work sector, and now even more so. They're not doing as well. They're not doing horribly, but they're not doing as well. Philadelphia, just for reference, actually is doing pretty well. But it's because of the strength of the visitation crowd and also the strength of the residential crowd. Philadelphia is a very prominent residential downtown, twice the American average. American average is about 15% of the downtown population is residents. Philadelphia is about 30%.
Wow.
So these have propped up the numbers rather significantly, even though there is, I think, our office population population is about 70% of pre-pandemic, and that's not nearly the worst. There are others.
I mean, if I could just jump
please
in
do.
on that, I agree. We cannot broad brush stroke what's happening in any particular downtown. And you really have to consider, did you have a balance of uses and was there a balance of demand
the key.
before the pandemic?
Right.
If you did, you're in much better position. And we just concluded a study in San Francisco Union Square, which resulted in a rezoning that happened in 9 months, which is like impossible. But Union Square and the financial district in San Francisco are struggling. What's not struggling are the neighborhoods in San Francisco.
Right.
Why? Because that's where people live.
Mm-hmm.
People do not live in Union Square. They do not live in the financial district. And those neighborhoods absolutely and they don't even call them neighborhoods. It's a central business district.
Right.
So when we have a central business district that's solely serving the needs of office workers and that population has evaporated effectively, that's where we have challenges, not in places as much as Philadelphia. And, we're in a position where we can increase, it's a little bit like a balancing act, right? We lose office workers. Can we increase residents? Well, we're looking at office to resi conversions. Can we increase visitors? Well, we've got to think about destination marketing, and so you just have to recalibrate, how you go about bringing people, because people equal spending. And that's what's going to drive all the economic activity that we see on the ground floor.
You're making a superb point. That's all right. If I project,
Do we even need these? I mean, can you guys hear us?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a superb point. It is very clear that a vibrant mix of uses, vibrant residential, vibrant visitation, and hopefully non-resident commuting works. It works because of the time of day. It works because there are different interest and mixes. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to ask one more question, then we'll jump to folks in the crowd. So let's talk a little bit about the existential crisis, which is these spaces that are empty, right? The buildings that we don't need as much space in for office workers. What are some of the difficulties of converting those things? And what are some of these new uses going to be? I understand destinations might be something at the ground level, like these pop-up museums that are popping everywhere, but that's not going to fill every empty CVS space, which, by the way, the CVS in my neighborhood just left. I was like, but, and the Rite Aid's about to go bankrupt. I'm like, where am I going to get my drugs? Not that I'm going to drug people, but I'm like, Mama needs this Flonase, but
Take that quote out of context and we have problems.
Exactly. The dean says he needs his drugs.
The guy at the corner with the trunk full of floaters.
It's crazy. And so can we just get into that a little bit? Because there is a true kind of existential crisis with some of those developers who own those
You're the
buildings? How are they going to
architect, so I'll
convert?
take- I'll have you take the first part of that.
I'll give you the Philadelphia story. If you have a city with old buildings, conversions are relatively
You're
easy.
good, yeah.
Philadelphia's been doing them for decades now because of a very aggressive tax abatement policy that dates to 1997. It was specifically originally designed for renovations of older buildings, and it wound up being pretty much everything was abated. Now the council is starting to pull it back, and because of the usual anxieties about wealthy condo owners getting tax abatements. So that's a whole other discussion. But a lot of buildings were converted downtown into residences. Why? Old buildings tended to be smaller footprints. So the floor plate worked for residential because you have to have light and air in bedrooms in particular. And it worked. You get into these big office buildings, 25,000 foot plate with a center core, and it turns out that the dimension from the core to the wall in an apartment house would be 25, 30 feet. But in an office building of modern era office building, those dimensions could be 40, 50 feet. And so how do you make an apartment that is not just a little shotgun slot, and you want to put a couple of bedrooms in, and you can't do it because they all need window.
Right.
And so there's a certain amount of cheating that goes on. Oh, that room that you just passed when you walked in the front door, that's not a bedroom, that's a study. The fact that
No windows.
the fact no windows, the fact that you planted your kid in there, because that's a bedroom. We won't talk about that. There's other goofy things that people do. They'll make that room, they'll lower the wall and create a kind of window at the top and say, well, it's borrowed light, through that window from the other window. That's really where the window is. There's all kinds of stuff that goes on. But fundamentally, it makes for awkward apartments. That's the problem. And
So what do we do?
you
Do you want to jump in here?
you make an
talk about the
apartment,
ground
and then
floor
what do you
thing?
do with the rest?
Yeah. I was actually just on a panel with an architect who's working on a number of conversions in Chicago of some of these older buildings. And what they literally have had to do is tear out the core.
Right. That is done. You tear out the core.
You tear out the core.
Right.
And the other issue they're having is that, these buildings, many of these buildings don't have operable windows. Well, the building code in Chicago does not allow you to have residents without operable windows. So now you're thinking about, the entire, envelope and dealing with that. So, it's an incredible challenge. But, I will say last year we gave some thought to this. At the end of the year, we did a thought leadership piece called if not retail or office, then what? And institutions. So Toro College here in Times Square occupied a building that was previously an office building, right? Colleges, universities, absolutely. Entertainment, culture, and these are not necessarily market-informed decisions, right? These are businesses that don't necessarily depend on discretionary spending, organizations that don't depend on discretionary spending. So I think those need to be in the mix as well. I will also say, and this is sacrilege, but I'm really passionate about this. We assume, and almost every single city that I work in assumes that you need retail on the ground floor of every building for it to be a great walkable street. It's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard.
Right,
You live in New York City, you walk down West End, you walk down Sutton Place. Those are lovely places to walk, and it's all ground floor residential. And people pay a lot of money to live in the ground floor of those neighborhoods. And yet we have rules and regulations that are requiring retail at the ground floor when we don't have sufficient demand for it anymore. And so we have vacancy. In fact, Magnificent Mile in Chicago has a 30% vacancy rate, which used to be the premier location in Chicago to have retail. So, there absolutely are challenges, but, I think the message for me, and maybe it's a late lesson learned, is that we built purpose-built spaces, and now they no longer serve their useful purpose there, and they're at the end of their lives. When I look at buildings that have been able to manage this conversion back and forth, they're buildings that offer you inherent flexibility. Right? Smaller floor plates. When I look at storefronts that used to be residents, and I was just in Amsterdam, or residents that are now storefronts that go both ways. It's these spaces that can accommodate both uses, and buildings are the same way. The older buildings, as you said, allow you to go from office to residential to hotel, to SRO, or, to the whole host of uses. But these huge floor plates, a challenge. Tear out the core. I don't know.
Great. Well, let's go to some questions from the crowd. You had one. Yes.
Yeah. Hi, Akshay, class of 2018. Really like the points that you guys mentioned, but one of the things right now is that the cost of capital is extremely high, and the real estate sector, I feel like, is mostly leveraged in terms of like ownership. So I know you mentioned, there's a lot of retail spending, but those retails go back to the businesses. But in terms of like, as a building owner or building leaser, as your loans are getting more expensive from the banks and you don't truly own the property, how do you plan to adjust? Because if less people are coming into the office and they're spending money elsewhere, your leases are still the same, if not going higher in terms of capital.
Has anybody heard of Project Kodak at all? So I think it's related. That basically looked at all of their assets, their owners, partial owners. I think it's related. And they're giving back the keys to their buildings to the banks.
Yes, that related.
It's Brookfield. No, it's not Brookfield either.
They just gave a guy. Art.
Yeah, RXR. Thank you. It's RXR. And we actually just dealt with a property in Chicago on Magnificent Mile, sort of the first major mall, Magnificent Mile, where MetLife now owns the building because Brookfield gave it back. And so I think these are very difficult decisions that owners are making. And they're deciding between their Class A buildings, which continue. In fact, Class A office buildings in Manhattan, the rents have sustained themselves or actually increased, versus Class B office buildings where rents have decreased. So, it's making that decision: which are we going to give up, and which are we going to maintain and reinvest in?
I think also that this came up in a panel I was on actually today, earlier in the day. I think that government, state and municipal government, probably is going to have to figure out how to, probably through tax policy, is probably going to have to figure out how to mitigate some of the high costs that are out there.
Yes.
Now, clearly, we're also in a bit of a lull. Interest rates are moving around. There's not enough stability in interest rates for people to feel confident about, like, oh, wait a minute, they might still go up more. They're not willing to bet either that it's going to go down. There needs to be a kind of stable moment. The development relies on predictability, and it's not predictable enough right now. So there's probably going to be a lull. Investors, whether that's funds or equity investors, they're sitting a bit on the sideline. They want to see what's going to happen. Most people I talk to believe it is a lull, not a long-term thing. So there's a little bit of good time to plan, wait this out a little longer. Look, the status of the world is not helping this. This is crazy time. And so it's just adding to the unpredictability. But this came up this morning. Philadelphia, just like New York, construction costs are crazy high. I mean, we're looking at science buildings that are the highest priced buildings I've ever seen in my entire career. We're looking at buildings that are well past $1,200, $1,300 a square foot to build. I mean, I just like, what? And Doug, you probably have higher ones than that.
That's just the direct cost.
That's just the direct cost. That's right. That's not the project. Projects are $1,800, $2,000. Harvard just built a new engineering school. It's pretty elaborate. It was a $2,000 a square foot building, and it's big. So it easily reached into the billions of it. That's Harvard. Drexel doesn't get to do that.
No, we accept billion-dollar checks.
We would
do.
accept
Come
the
along.
checks,
Yeah.
absolutely. No,
We
there's
do.
no,
I'm just saying.
There's no question about that. And if you do want to do that, talk to Jason. He's got some needs over here. So the only thing that mitigates it is government policies. That's why the abatement has worked in Philadelphia. That's why there are these Keystone Opportunity Zones that become tax-free areas for a period of 10 years. And it probably needs to be a more thoughtful, concerted effort to do that. Public won't like it because they'll just say, well, that's just giving money away to greedy developers. But, you know, if the flip side is, well, nothing is going to happen, people have to really start taking, you know, that to heart.
Do you want to jump in? Or do you want to ask? Let's go to the question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Larisa.
This is I apologize in advance. So, had an architectural history professor who I hated. He used to say that the only reason cities exist is because they're efficient means of exchanging goods and services. And that kind of stuck with me. I think that's the point both of you are making. The current, and I'm going to build on it. I say it's coin. You know, the current economic environment for us grayites reminds me of the late 80s, you know, when the commercial real estate market collapsed because they were over leveraged. The difference was the demand was still strong. And what you saw then were all the sovereign wealth funds, and particularly the Asian ones, came in and bought up most of Philadelphia and a lot of New York at that time. And, you know, most of the commercial office space, certainly in the East, is over leveraged. And, you know, there are, not to be a negative Nancy on that, but the question, and the fundamental question to your point, Alan, is the demand's not there. And, right, will sovereign wealth funds come in and buy these buildings? But more importantly, what are you going to do with it?
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And does any city, I mean, if any city has the capacity to deal with it, it's New York, right? But does any city have the capacity to deal with the magnitude of the problem? It may or may not happen, but some people are arguing, well, what do you guys think?
Go ahead, Larisa.
That's like the equivalent of Y2K, you know, like I agree with you. I hope it's the same too, right? We were all ready and then it happened and it was okay.
I stayed up.
But I that's what keeps me up at night as well. You know, it's something that I'm very, very concerned about. You know, I do think that there's going to be a shakeout. You know, it's the same like with malls where Class A malls have done really well and Class B malls, right? Exactly. So, you know, I think we have that in cities too, where we have premier cities that have all the characteristics that we still need and want in cities. And then we have Class B and C cities that don't. And I think what differentiates them, in my mind, is culture, art, places to congregate.
I slipped her 20 before.
You know, I mean, think about what Taylor Swift did for the economies of these downtowns, right? And actually, you know, ticket prices for all of these things are going up. People still want to see live music. And so the one thing I feel confident about in New York is that we have those assets in spades. And so what happens if you look at transit data, you will see that weekend trips on Metro North exceed pre-pandemic levels. Weekday trips don't. So people are coming to the city, and I sort of quip, you know, we have young people who still need to meet their partners, who still want to go out and have fun. So I sort of joke, sex will save the city, right? Like
Interesting twist on the show.
Yeah. Everybody who's single, raise their hand. Let's see if we can make sense.
You know, and so, and you see that rents in New York continue to do very well. You know, people still want to live in New York. They may not want to work every day from Midtown, but that's a different problem. So I think, you know, as we look at which cities have this sort of premier city status, I think we have to think about those things and how do we reinforce, you know, the reason to come downtown. It's not a downtown central district anymore. You know, it's a downtown social district, you know, and maybe we just need to reorient how we think about downtowns.
We've got a couple other questions over here. Let's go to Ali on that.
I'm unemployed majority and somebody who moved from Philadelphia, Center City, Philadelphia to New York the last 12 years, got married, had 2 kids, and just recently moved from the Lower East Side to the suburbs of Philadelphia again for my family.
Good choice.
Now,
I'm just kidding. I said good choice.
My wife's happy. But the point is, I think it's a very interesting conversation, and I also think that people, I've noticed, even in the burbs, people need that pedestrian activity that's akin to like the flora in a Greek island, where you can be in the tiniest Greek village and there's still life that exceeds the American suburb on the street. And I think the demand is there, but to Akshay's point, the real estate's over leveraged, and I'm saving about $1,500 a month just by moving to the burbs, even though I'm increasing my transit to get here.
Okay.
And it breaks my heart. I wanna work in my office building that's near some meth clinics, just to be in it. But, and I'm an architect and I work in the public sector, but I think one thing that has to be considered is, yes, development needs to occur, but if we have the culture in the city, when I left Philly in 2011, Northern Liberties was where all the artists from Brooklyn moved because it's affordable. Like how can the artists and the culture continue to create comfortably without eating ramen every night in a city that the rent in New York is past $10,000 at this point? It's, I think, unsustainable. And unless you're, a developer or a tech guy, I mean, nothing against that, but the artists, the people who see things differently, where are they going to go? And I think that's